You assume that there is no hope, and you guarantee that there will be no hope. If you assume that there is an instinct for freedom, that there are opportunities to change things, then there is a possibility that you can contribute to making a better world.
And that exactly is how Captain Fantastic's protagonist Ben seems to lead his life and the life of his children. A sort of protective haven set with the sole purpose of protecting his children from the poisonous society of the outside world, priming them in both academic and physical excellence. Yet as the story unfolds, we begin to perceive the situation through other perspectives, and finally reaching the fact that what Ben has created is somewhat of a cult, that he, despite his hatred towards such, has become a sort of a religious leader himself, molding his children with tribal fanaticism, a complete rejection to the outside world which even his kids begin to realize has turned them into freaks in our modern world.
I know nothing! I am a freak because of you! You made us freaks!
From the beginning of the film, we feel nothing but affection for Ben, we feel admiration for Ben, and most importantly, we feel sympathy for Ben. However, this is mostly due to the fact that we see the film through his perspective. Ben's father-in-law calls him the worst thing that happened to his family, and we do not understand why. Yet as the story unfolds, the line begins to clear, and we begin to sympathize with other characters that start to feel animosity towards him, and we don't need to ask the reason why. This is somehow foreshadowed when Ben's daughter Kayler describes Lolita for us.
Because it's written from his perspective. You sort of understand and sympathize with him, which is kind of amazing because he's essentially a child molester. But his love for her is beautiful. But it's also sort of a trick because it's so wrong. It makes me feel... I hate him. And somehow I feel sorry for him at the same time.
Well done.
Throughout the film, we receive several implications and hints that portray Ben as a sort of a religious figure, maybe closer to a priest. In several scenes, you see Ben holding a book similar as to what a priest may look like. And I just had to play this scene. I mean, it's such a blatant and obvious gesture by the director in order to portray Ben in this religious figure. I mean, it's exactly as if it's like a priest saying, "Come, my child." And he's holding a book, like literally holding a Bible in his arm. In a more conspicuous move, Matt Ross, the movie's director and writer, even goes as far as for the children to pretend to be part of an ultra-Christian homeschooled family. Without the blatant references to Jesus and the Virgin Mary, this is not far from the truth at all. This is echoed in this following scene in which Ben's oldest son, Bo, says that everything that he knows in this world has come out of a book. These words can ultimately be said by a radical whose life revolves around his or her religion's holy book. For example, a devout Christian who gets all the information they need in this life simply from the pages of the Bible.
It comes out of a fucking book! I don't know anything about anything!
Actually, the very first scene of the movie further empowers the point that Ben is, in fact, developing a sort of tribe rather than a successful upbringing for his children. A kind of tribal ritual of making your first hunt and eating the heart of that has been hunted, and thus becoming a man. A sort of Native American, or rather a primitive ceremony that further proves that Ben has heedlessly created something of a cult. In this scene, Ben checks on one of his kids and notices absurd decorations from Pol Pot to some sort of Aztec-like ornaments of hunted skulls and pelts. Ben is somehow shocked, yet ignores it and moves on, somehow blinded by his yearning for a successful upbringing of his children, or philosophy kings. One curious character development of Ben is that though he is faced with extremely emotional situations throughout the film, we see him grieve on several occasions, yet we never get to see his tears, as his grief is constantly being masked and disguised by sources of water, or cleansing water, which in turn is very closely related to religion. This indicates that Ben's so-called religion attempts to hide his true feelings, yet at the very end, during the scene in which his children decide to stay with him rather than choose to live with their grandparents, we finally get to see Ben crying and actually see heavily focused tears running down his face. This leads to the ending of the movie, in which Ben is relieved that his children have decided to continue with his style of life. However, ultimately, Ben understands that his way of life was not the best for his children, and eventually finds a resolution, a midline between his way of life and the way of our modern world. In the final scene, you see the children at the table in the morning, eating breakfast and finishing their schoolwork. An almost normal, everyday picture of an American family preparing for their school day. Ben looks around at his children individually. It is obvious that he is sacrificing for them, so that they may benefit the most, and we as a viewer are happy for the apparent safe ending. Yet, as the seconds in this final scene pass, with simply the detailed sounds of eating and writing, the viewer leans in, hoping for a taste of the adventure that we experienced in the beginning of the film. But we are treated with nothing in return but the yearning stares of Ben into the distance. You see the longing in his eye as he looks past the window and into the nature, into his real home. Roll credits.
They say everything can be replaced.